my first name is Raj, and my last name is Party. The Raj in Indian language sounds for king. So I'm the king of parties. So we are going to have a party tonight. And you won't believe, as an anesthesiologist, in the early morning when I used to go and see my patients and introduce myself that I'm Dr. Party, they won't believe it. They used to think I've given that name to myself. Like I have to show them my driver's license or have the nurse watch for me. Because they used to think I'm going to get the morphine, nitrous oxide. So I called myself Dr. Party. So anyway, it was a fun name growing up, and it's a fun name even right now. My daughter tells me she's at USC. There are 100 students in her class, but everybody knows who she is because when they're doing the attendance, everybody knows who Ambika Party is. Today I'm going to talk to you about an incident which happened in my life approximately 3 years ago, which changed my life forever. What I ate, what I drank, what I drove, where I worked, my relationship with God, with my wife, with my kids, everything in my life changed. And that was my near-death experience. Before I tell you about my near-death experience, how it transformed me, it will be a good idea for me to tell you my life before my NDE. I was born and raised in India to a middle-class family. My father was a very strict disciplinarian, and so much so that he used to believe the British saying, spare the rod and spoil the child. So I got my shares of beatings. And so much so that I rebelled against him. So in my 10th grade, I got into a very bad company, and I started watching movies during the school time, started drinking, started smoking, and one day I was obviously caught, and then my father gave me the beating of my life. He hit me with a baseball bat, actually a cricket bat, and I could not go to school for 3 weeks. But after 3 weeks, he also changed. And so much so that he started waking me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, making me coffee, making me sandwich, and making me study. And then, okay.
Talk straight into the end.
Okay. And then I started standing first or second in the class. And I became a very good student. But what I realized, what he did, the beating was wrong, but he could have done the same thing with love, which he did later on. There was no need for that cruel beating. And why I'm bringing my father up, because he shows up in my NDE also. And then I wanted to become a doctor. Before that I had no plans, and I didn't have biology as a subject. My mother came and talked to the vice principal because I have to take biology and I have to get the vice principal's permission. The vice principal was so rude to my mother. He made my mother cry and said, "Do you think your son is going to be a doctor one day?" My mother was crying so bad. And recently I was in India in December, and we were talking about that incident. And that day I resolved, no matter what it takes, I'm going to be a doctor one day. And I worked very hard. It's very hard to get into medical school in India. Only 1 in 100,000 gets selected, and I was selected at 3 medical schools. Medical school was very tough, emotionally and hard work studying-wise. You know, I remember studying sometimes 14 to 16 hours a day. It was so stressful that in my medical school, there was at least one suicide or a severe nervous breakdown every year. One, at least every year. So after I finished my medical school, I came to the United States to pursue higher education. And I came here, I still remember the date in New York on JFK, 22nd October 1982. So approximately I've been here 31 and a half years. I only had $500 in my pocket. I was picked up by my friend, and we were staying in, if you know New York, in Queens, Flushing, New York. And there we had 1-bedroom apartment, and we were studying for our exams to stay. And to survive, I worked as a security guard. I worked as a selling newspapers on subway stores, and I also worked as a taxi driver. Taxi driver I know very well, I remember very well, because I used to tell them that I'm a doctor, and as sympathy I used to get a much higher tip. And then I passed my exams, and I started doing my residency. I did a residency first in pediatrics. And after I did my residency in pediatrics, I started working as an accreditation. But the American dream had caught me, and it became a runaway American dream. I became very materialistic. Money in it as a pediatrician was not enough for me. So I did another residency as an anesthesiologist, to be an anesthesiologist, because I figured out anesthesia was one of the highest paid specialties, so working half the time I could double my income. So I did residency second time. And after I finished my residency in Nashville, Tennessee, I went out to university. I moved to California because my sister was living there. And while I was doing my second residency in anesthesia, I got married. Mine was a semi-arranged marriage. Why I call semi-arranged? Because I went to India. My father had selected about 5-10 girls, and then first time I went there, I didn't like anybody, so I came back. And it used to be so hard to tell a girl that, you're not for me. But in India, they have a very nice excuse, and they tell easily, oh, your horoscope didn't match with us. So nobody's feelings are hurt. The families deal with that. So then I went the second time. When I went the second time, my wife was, I think, the fifth girl I was seeing that time. And we literally spoke for half an hour and we decided, okay, we are for each other. And I had only 2 weeks vacation. I saw her for the first time on 29th January, got engaged to her on 31st January, got married to her on 12th February. And then I had to fly back. And then my mother in between says, oh, I want to be grandmother soon. As if she's giving me an assignment. And I said, Mom, don't worry, I'm working very hard at it. As if it's a homework, she's telling me, oh, you need to do your homework good, you need to stand first. And literally by God's grace, we had a baby boy 9 months, 9 days later. I have a wonderful wife, and we celebrated our 25th anniversary last year, and I surprised her. And she is a wonderful woman. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't have her support. To be on this new path, she is the one who is backing me up. Of course, the higher powers are backing me up too, but at an earthly level, she is the one who is backing me up. And from there, as I mentioned, I moved to California because my sister was living there in Fresno. And I had a house in Northridge, Los Angeles suburb. But I found a locum, we call it a locum job, which means a 2-week temporary job in Bakersfield, California. I moved to California, Bakersfield, for just a 2 weeks temporary job. But now it is 22 years, I'm still there. Because we liked having a small town atmosphere. We developed friends, our kids developed friends, and it just grew on us. For 5 years when I moved there, I was always thinking I'm going to move back to Los Angeles, I'm going to move back to Los Angeles. I didn't even build a house, I always rented a house. In Bakersfield, California, I was at the Bakersfield Heart Hospital, and gradually I rose up the ranks and I became chief of anesthesia at Bakersfield Heart Hospital. I used to love giving anesthesia, especially for the heart surgeries, because I was technically very good at it. There's a lot of technical work involved in the anesthesia, especially heart anesthesia. And heart anesthesia can be very stressful at times, because at times we stop the heart of the patient totally. And then after the surgery is done, we literally shock the heart with jumper cables to make it beat again. Or like a pacemaker, we use a pacemaker to keep it beating. And so many times, the heart would not start back. And that used to give a lot of stress, because in spite of our best effort, the patient would die. It used to be so painful to go and talk to the near and loved ones that your near one did not make it. And 5 hours ago, the person was hale and hearty, not hale and hearty, but it was alive and talking. And we didn't have time to process our emotions, because an hour later, we have to put somebody else to sleep. And then, when I came home, I was so stressed out. The days I was not on call, I'm emphasizing the days I was not on call, I would start with one drink of scotch, and then it would become a second drink, and third drink, and then I would get sleepy, eat something, and go to sleep. The days I was on call, I just managed it without drinking because I did not want to jeopardize anybody else's life, because I could be called within 15-minute notice. I have to be in the hospital within 20 minutes of the time I'm called for an emergency surgery. And which used to happen, like emergency heart surgery, or, aortic aneurysms where the aorta is, bulging. And that was my stress management. But materialistically, it was very, very rewarding. Anesthesia is one of the best specialties to be in if one wants to make money. It's the fourth best job as such in the United States right now. It afforded me a lot of luxuries. I built a house, then I built another house after 3 years, then 3-4 years later I built another house. So I had about 3-4 houses in Bakersfield in 22 years. My last house was about 10,000 plus square foot house. It was so huge that with my kids, we used to communicate through iPhone. Because we could not hear each other. It had a nice theater, even an 18-seater theater. I still remember decorating like a 1920 cinema hall with the satin curtains, we had an exit sign also like that, and we even got an antique popcorn machine from eBay, to go with that atmosphere of 1920 cinema hall. So that was my materialistic life. I had a sports BMW, my wife had a sports Mercedes, and for SUV, I used to drive a Hummer, a gas-guzzling Hummer. And I didn't care that it only gave 8 miles a gallon, but I could afford it, so that's all I cared at that time. So that was my very materialistic life. Like I used to say, materialism was my religion and dollar was my God. And that's what being a first generation immigrant and to achieve this material success was my only goal. My life was outside, to anybody from outside, looked very good because I had this success as an anesthesiologist. My wife was a dentist. We had a good 7-figure income, annual income. So, but from inside it was hollow. Something was missing. Something deep was missing. And I used to talk to my friends and say, I do not know whether I own the house or the house owns me, because I'm working harder and harder to pay the mortgage. Including the property tax, I had a mortgage about $15,000 that time. So I was working very hard. And then, one day, me and my wife were sitting in the backyard, and the phone rang. We were having tea. It's custom. The Britishers left us around 4 o'clock. We were having tea. When the phone rang, it was my urologist, Dr. Chang. And he told me, Raj, are you sitting or standing? I said, I'm standing. But he said, you better sit down. He said, I have a good news and a bad news. The bad news is you have prostate cancer. And the good news is it's in very early stages. If we do the surgery, it can be cured. I was in a state of shock. I didn't know what to say. I felt like the ground under my feet had moved. And I went and told my wife. So next morning, we went and discussed all the options with our urologist. Because there's a test, most of the men get it as a screening test known as PSA, prostate specific antigen. And in my case, it had doubled in 1 year. So that's the reason he did biopsies. So we found a surgeon in Florida, Miami, Florida, who did it through laparoscopically, like without opening all the way up. So we flew there as the best surgeon we could think of, or find. The surgery went fine, but it left me with complications. The complications were chronic pain, chronic scarring, and incontinence. So much so, for these, I needed 7 surgeries in 2 years. And the chronic pain was so bad that they prescribed narcotic pain medications for me. And gradually, then I became addicted to them. First I became dependent on them, then I became addicted to them. And you will be very surprised, right now in the United States, prescription drugs are a bigger problem than illegal drugs. You know, like Vicodin is available in high schools, OxyContin is available in high schools, morphine, and all these prescription narcotics. And then, this all led me to depression. At one time, I was on 3 antidepressants. Because I was very mad at God. I was mad at my life. Why everything had to change, otherwise it was going so smooth. It was materialistic, but it was from outside at least very smooth. And then, I gradually worsened. And so much so, in December of 2010, the doctor at UCLA decided that I needed another surgery to cure my incontinence, which was not getting better. So that surgery was done on 14th of December 2010. Again, the surgery went fine, but I developed complications. 2 days after the surgery, I started having redness, swelling, fever, and so much so by Christmas Eve, the fever was 105, and I could not go to the bathroom. I was getting septic because they had implanted an artificial device for me to be able to control my bladder. So my wife called the doctor and he said to come immediately to UCLA. And from Bakersfield to UCLA in the University of California, Los Angeles Medical Center is about 2 hours drive. It was such a excruciating travel for me. And my wife was in terrible shape, crying, you know, what's going to happen to her husband, and like that. So finally we reached the UCLA hospital. And then they took one look at me and they said, we need to take the device out because it has become a source of infection and I was becoming septic. You know, the sepsis, if it's not managed properly, the infection is not controlled properly, can lead to septic shock, and septic shock can lead to death. So next morning, on Christmas Day, they prepared me for surgery. And it started around 6 or 7 in the morning. Early morning, you know, the whole process. I think I went into the operating room around 7 o'clock when I saw the clock in the operating room. General anesthesia was induced. And then, 10-15 minutes after surgery had started, I found myself floating above 10 to 12 feet, looking at myself being operated. My first reaction was, did somebody put some LSD in my anesthesia? But of course that was not the case. But I could see myself being operated. I could hear the conversations, and the anesthesiologist even told a joke, which I verified later, but I cannot tell the joke because it was not a clean joke. But part of the job as an anesthesiologist, me myself, is to keep the atmosphere in the operating room light. Because anesthesia is just like a plane takeoff. A lot of work in the beginning, a lot of work in the end, but in the middle is usually cruising. And that's time when the surgery is happening. So we keep the atmosphere light. I used to know so many jokes that time, you know, now I don't remember them. And then from there, I would like to say like my consciousness went to a very serene realm, but that was not the case in my case. You know, like most of the NDAs you hear, oh, it was all love, it was all very nice. But for me, it went to a realm where it was pitch dark, and there was a perpetual thunderstorm and raging fire. I did not want to go there, but I was taken there, screaming and kicking. I could hear other souls, you know, crying and wailing. My first reaction there was, why am I here? What have I done? And being a Hindu, you know, that was my first reaction, why am I here? And telepathically, I was given the realization, like so far I had led a very materialistic, very mean life. No matter what it costed me to get ahead, I would want to get ahead, even if I had to put somebody down. So, I was not good to my patients even. You know, I was good technically to become the chief of anesthesia, but I had a pain management practice too. I still remember it as an example, a lady, about 70-year-old with arthritis comes to my office. And I, in a rush to see another patient, barely wrote her prescription and in 5 minutes walked out. But she wanted to talk to me because her husband was dying of cancer. She wanted a shoulder to talk to, lean to. But for me, she was just a lady with arthritis and who needs a prescription. But that has changed in me, but that was my nature at that time. How many more patients can I see? And my nature used to be that time, it was not, I don't want to put the doctors down, but was how many procedures can I find from these patients? Because the procedures is what made the money for doctors. Like, giving an example, an office visit for 15 minutes would only pay me $65. But in the same 15 minutes for back, if I did an epidural, I got paid $450. The same 15 minutes. So that's why, as a pain management doctor, to make more money, I would not do procedure on somebody who did not need it at all, but in gray areas and other things, we were looking, me and my partners would see how many procedures we could do. That's where the money was. That was my materialistic life. And when I realized that I had led a wrong life, and I will change in future, and I was crying and asking for help, my father showed up to my rescue. He has died about 20 years ago in Fresno after a complication from bypass surgery. And he led me from the hellish realm. Actually, the hellish realm started fading away when I started realizing my mistakes. And I had love pouring out through me that I will be a different person. So my father took me towards a tunnel, and in there, he gave me advice. And his advice were the same words he had repeated it to me on his deathbed, which I had forgotten. And his words were, "My son, if you keep your consciousness clear and you're truthful to your own self, the divine, the universe will take care of you." And I had forgotten those words. But now, they have become my anchor, my North Star. And there I had review of my life. And review of my life was kind of a reverse review. What I call about is that I was made to feel the feelings that other people were feeling with my actions, not what I was feeling. And so that's why I realized where I was good, where I was bad, and what the reaction was other people. And in my review, the most amazing thing was I had a review of my past lives. And one of the past lives is the same past life I had experienced about 5 years before my NDE. I had gone to meet Deepak Chopra, he's Indian, he's a doctor. I said, let me go and see his keynote to Phoenix for a Celebrate Your Life conference. And there was Dr. Brian Weiss, who's a pioneer in past life regression in the United States, was also giving a workshop. Just for curiosity, I went there. And that time, I have a scar from here to here on my right wrist because I had injured my right wrist, lifting a very heavy suitcase. And that, I had surgery and it had become a chronic pain. I was not able to work for 6 months because of the chronic pain. And during that regression to Dr. Brian Weiss, I found myself as a cruel prince in medieval times. And then I was whipping the poor farmers. I still have their eyes in front of me. They had pathetic eyes. They were wearing brown tattered clothes, half gone. And then I was also telling my soldiers to whip them. And then I asked forgiveness from those farmers. And they forgave me. And my hand got better, and I was able to go back to work in 2 weeks. I really didn't know what to make of it. It was coincidence that time, or it was past life, which otherwise I was wondering, how could it happen that in the present life, I could go to the past life and ask forgiveness? And recently I was visiting Dr. Raymond Moody. He had invited me, the one who wrote the book, Life After Life, and coined the term near-death experience. I stayed at his house. And I asked him this question. He said, because in that realm, there's no time, there's no space, which I had realized, but I had not put two and two together. And that all the present, past, and future, in a way, is occurring at the same time. that makes total sense that you could go. The time is not linear there. It's not that 1 follows 2 and 2 follows 3, but it could exist at the same time. And the second life I remember there was around 18th century. I was a poppy farmer in Afghanistan. I remember having a henna-colored beard, a turban, and I started tasting the sap myself. And gradually I became opium addicted, and I died of opium overdose. And these tendencies of me being cruel and being mean manifested in my life. And my addiction to the pain medicines was also from my addiction to the opium in the previous life. Not everybody who is prescribed medicines, chronic pain medicines, becomes addicted. So this was my review of my past lives. And from the other side, I was led through a tunnel. There was a bright light on the other side. On the other side, I was welcomed by 2 angelic beings who telepathically told me they were Michael and Raphael, and they were my guardian angels. And when I told my wife, I'm a Hindu, like, this is what happened, her first reaction was, what happened to the thousands of Indian gods and goddesses? None of them showed up. And that doesn't make sense in a way, because being raised there and later on studying about NDEs, they talk about usually you encounter the people which you culturally grew up with in the other realm. But I guess I've been in US for the last 32 years, so it has grown in me. And then I studied about angels, and like I was showing her in the morning, I have a pendant of Angel Gabriel, because I started believing in angels. They were so helpful to me in the other realm, that Gabriel is an angel for communication, for speaking, and to me it made total sense that Raphael is an angel for healing and is patron saint for the doctors and healers, and Michael is the angel for strength. I didn't know about that before, but later on. And those angels gave me wisdom of knowledge. Especially they told me that there are different levels of consciousness. And as you go higher and higher, the consciousness becomes pure and totally formless. And that's what our essential nature is. And from there, the angels guided me, and I floated above the meadows, roses of different color. And the colors were so vibrant, like somebody mentioned today, they were live. They were live. You could see the difference in the colors from the earth field. And there was soft, gentle air blowing, small breeze, nice to touch. And then there was smell. It was not a smell, it was sweet aura. Very gentle, sweet aura. From there, I was in the presence of a light. The light was like 1,000 suns at the same time, but it was not hurting. And all I felt there was love and intelligence. Most of the people only feel love, but I also felt knowledge and intelligence in that presence. I was given the realization that I have to go back. Everything will be okay. But my life has to change. I have to lead a more spiritual life. I have to give up my career as an anesthesiologist, which I love, to be now a spiritual person, be a healer, especially a healer of the 3 conditions I have to face: cancer, depression, and addiction to pain medicines. And if you want to add the 4th, the chronic pain. And one of the reasons I faced these conditions in my life, all these 4 of them, was that I have empathy to the people who have this. And after this realization, all of a sudden, some words flashed in the sky, which read Course in Miracles. And absolutely, I had no idea what they meant. And now, I've become a student of Course in Miracles. I read it every day, and I even read a prayer on page 28 to Diane in the morning, which said, I said, Diane, I'm nervous, I don't know what to say. And the prayer said, He who sent me will give me the words what to say. And that's, before I come to speak, I read that prayer each day, when I have to speak. Otherwise, there's a lesson every day one is supposed to do. Today was 67th lesson. Yeah. And from there, all of a sudden, I woke up in the recovery room. And I wanted to go down on my knees. I had bandages, I could not. But to thank heaven for the experience I had. I told the nurse what happened. And she said she has heard this before, but she was very busy, hooking up the monitors and everything. Then 15 minutes later, the anesthesiologist comes to check me. And I said, didn't you tell this joke? His reaction was, he said, oh, you know it better, you must be lying in anesthesia. That's why you heard it. Because hearing is the first sensation to come back under anesthesia and the last to go. But my argument with him was, if I was light in anesthesia, I should be hurting too. But there was no pain. There was no pain. Anyway, he brushed it aside, and then I remembered I had a similar case about 10, 15 years ago, and a special kind of surgery we were doing, repairing the aorta of the heart, coming up the aorta, and for that, it's not just stopping the heart, but it's to put the patient totally frozen. We bring the temperature down to 30 degrees, and there's no blood flowing at all to the brain or the heart. And we literally have 35 minutes to do the surgery, otherwise the patient will not make it. 30 minutes. And that patient gave me a similar view, and I thought, since he had no oxygen going to his brain for 30 minutes, he must be hallucinating. And actually, I prescribed a drug for him, Haldol, intramuscular shot, to calm him down. That was my reaction. That's what most of the reaction is. Like you read Dr. Eben Alexander's book, before his own experience, he never believed this. Most of the doctors believe it's hallucinatory. But for me, the biggest proof came how my life started changing. First of all, I felt it was real. For me, it was real. But what happened afterwards, what made a big difference in me. Like my house was not unsafe. And I was told to lead a more spiritual life. No, I was not giving instruction that you go and sell your house, but to lead a more spiritual life, less materialistic life. And then my friend, who's a plastic surgeon, not a friend, more like acquaintance who I had worked with, comes to see me after my surgeries. And he said, Raj, I want to buy your house. I said, it's not for sale. He said, but I really want to buy. And then me and my wife talked. Maybe that is a good idea. But he had a modest house from his residency days to sell too. And without any real estate agent involved, we just exchanged our houses. We just exchanged our houses. Now I have a smaller house. It's a decent house, but a smaller house, not compared to what I had, 10, 11,000 square foot house. And then I sold my car. I sold my Hummer. Car actually the lease expired, but Hummer I sold. And instead of getting another expensive toy or expensive car, I got a Toyota Camry hybrid. So like a kid with my friends, my life literally and figuratively went from Hummer to hybrid. It was from 8 miles a gallon, I went to 35 to 40 miles a gallon. And then my relationship with my wife changed. I became a more loving, more caring person. Like I one day sent her flowers out of love. And she said, why did you send me flowers? It's not a birthday, it's not an anniversary. And why? I said, because I love you. But I wanted to make sure that I don't send her flowers too much, because then she'll get an idea, are you partying too much? That I'm guilty conscious. And so much so, one time, I woke up in the morning and she was sleeping. And I don't know what happened to me, and inspiration came to me to write a poem. What is love? And I had never written such kind of work before my NDA, and wrote a poem. Love is when you are there, the world is there, Nirvana, the ultimate bliss, is there. Love is there, standing in the DMV line, Department of Motor Vehicles line. Together, a couple has more fun than others have on their honeymoon. Love is when it's like two flavors of ice cream just want to melt together and become one. Love is there when love is when being together is like the smell of earth when it has been dry and the first rain falls. I love that smell so much, and that's why I wrote that. Very earthing, very soothing, smell from the Mother Earth. Love is when being together time stops and one feels that this is heaven. Love is when one's heart skips a beat upon seeing the other. And the last one, love is when holding hands and running on the beach feels like being one with the universe. Because I live in California and my wife's, we don't live on a beach. We live in Bakersfield, California, which is about 2 hours from the beach. We love going to the beach and walking on the beach. That's where it came from. And in the end I say, love is when in spite of all efforts, including those above, one gives up and says, you are love personified, otherwise I cannot define it. And this is my nature change. And for our 25th anniversary, I surprised her with a trip to Paris and Venice last March. And we were married on 12th February. We were actually supposed to get married on Valentine's Day, but in India, there was a strike, sudden strike in the hotel. So we had to prepone our marriage by 2 days. Yeah, I think Valentine's is the 14th, right? Yeah, my marriage was on the 12th of February. So my nature changed, and my nature changed with my kids. And somebody asked me, how does a kids react to you? I have 2 boys and a daughter. My boys, they are as such agnostic as far as the spirituality is concerned or religion is concerned. And towards me, my incident, they're agnostic. But they like the new dad, who is more caring, more friendly. And I have broken the cycle, what my father did to me, who was very abusive to me physically. I was not physically abusive to my boys, but I was verbally very abusive to my sons at the time. Because that's the way my father treated me. I still remember my son who is in medical school, the eldest one, failed his medical school the 3rd time. And I was so mad at him that I called him names. But then the same thing happened. He was to give exam, USMLE, to be able to start doing clinical rotation in US. He failed again 2 times. And this time, I surprised him and he was surprised that I was very calm. I was more like a friend. And I said, how can I help him? And he was, how can he help me? Mutually. And then we made a plan that I took 2-3 months off from my job and worked with him. And moved with him to Aruba. He was going to a Caribbean medical school. And I helped him pass his exam. And then I gave up my career as an anesthesiologist. And I'm so thankful to God and thankful to my wife, that my wife is a dentist, and her words were, Raja means my prince. You have supported the family for 22, 24 years. Now if you want to follow your dream, to be a healer, to be a spiritual speaker, to be an author, go for it. And I'll be there to support you. I can, of course, go back to being an anesthesiologist. I have the safety net. As I was mentioning, anesthesia is one specialty where one doesn't have to build the practice up. You can go back anytime you want, as long as there's a job. And me being the chief at the heart hospital, I have very good relationships with the surgeons and with the chairman, the president of the hospital. I'm sure if I want to go back. But that is not my path now. That's not my dharma. My dharma is to be a healer, to spread the spiritual knowledge, to spread the truths which are already there, but I witnessed them myself. The truths being is life after death. The consciousness can exist separate from the body. The angelic beings or guides which are there to help us. And the pure nature of the existence of the light being is love, pure love. And that's are the truths which I witness myself. And then I say, one does not have to have an NDE to transform. Because I figured out from my experience and my studies, a mantra which I call about forgive, love and heal. If one practices these 3 things, then one can transform in this life without a near-death experience. And forgiveness is very important. In my case, I was very mad, as I mentioned, at God, at my life circumstances. So quote unquote, I had to forgive God. I wrote a letter forgiving God. And that letter, I floated in the ocean. It was biodegradable. And I floated in the ocean. Because now I'm earth friendly. So I floated in the ocean, And then the hardest forgiveness is to forgive your own self. That was one of the hardest. Why did I get addicted to the medicines? Or why this happened to me? Why that happened? And then you forgive others. And forgiving others, there are different ways of doing it. One is writing a letter, as I mentioned, or looking at the same situation from a different angle. Like for my own case, I came up with two personalities, Poor Rajiv and Lucky Rajiv. Poor Rajiv was the one who sold his house, who gave up his career as an anesthesiologist, who's not driving expensive cars anymore, who's living in a modest house, like what my friends would be thinking from outside, that he's Poor Rajiv. And Lucky Rajiv is the one who lives in a modest house, drives an earth-friendly car, and is able to pursue his own dharma, his own passion. That anesthesia was my passion at one time, but with time, it's not my passion now. So that is the Lucky Rajiv. So when I'm feeling down for some reason, I feel, which one do I want to be? Lucky Rajiv or Poor Rajiv? And then, my addiction was miraculously cured after my NDE. My depression took a few months to heal, but it was off all antidepressants in about 3-4 months. And my chronic pain also got better. And in 8 months, I went back to UCLA and they did the surgery again, but on the other side. And this time it was totally successful. So a lot of things happened in my life, which were, I'm thankful to the heaven, to the divine for it. And after forgiveness, I want to talk about love. As I mentioned, love is the core nature of the light being. As I was there, all my 5 senses were totally saturated with love. As I say, I could smell love, I could touch love, I could see love, I could hear love, I could taste love. It's very hard to describe what the sensation was there, because there are no earthly words. And the closest I could come was Sanskrit word known as Shanti. And a lot of people must have heard that word who go to the yoga. Most of the time they say Shanti in the end. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And Shanti is a word, Sanskrit word, it stands for cosmic peace, cosmic stillness, cosmic harmony. That is the closest I could describe what I was feeling there. And that is what nature of, in a way, love is. And that Shanti can be replicated in this world by deep meditation, to some extent, but otherwise it cannot be. And nowadays I've become a very deep meditator. And that is my stress management nowadays, not a bottle or alcohol scotch, but meditation. And so next month, I'm going for a 10 days Vipassana meditation in India to get that. One doesn't have to go to Himalayas, one can do it in their house, but still is an extra thing. I get to see my mom and everything. So for 10 days, I want to get that feeling of stillness and Shanti again, to be in that touch with that light being again. And I want to experience that longing I have for that Shanti, stillness. I'm looking forward to it. It's 10 days, no quiet, totally quiet, no internet, no iPhone, nothing. It's in Dharamshala, the place where the Dalai Lama lives. So that is love. And special kind of love I want to talk about is again a Sanskrit word, seva. Seva is service. Service with gratitude. Where the only reward one is seeking from helping somebody is the opportunity that a person gave you to help them. I'll give you an example from my own life, what I call seva. In 1980, 2 years before I came to US, I had gone to Munich, Germany to give the first exam to be able to come to US. And that time, I was, after my exam, in the downtown Munich area, I was watching a street show. They have street shows there. And I had a small bag in my hand which had my passport, my ticket, and little money I had. I was, I think, 18 that time. And I left it on the, where the stairs were, where the steps were, and sitting bench. And after 15, 20 minutes, I realized I don't have my bag with me. And then a person was walking by, same features like me, same color as me. I went over towards him and said, "Are you an Indian?" He said, "No, I'm a Pakistani." The moment he said he's a Pakistani, I stepped back. Because we in India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars. We grew up hating Pakistanis. Because at one time, we were one country till 1947. Then because of religion, we separated. And there was a mutual hatred. And my father was stuck on the Pakistan side with the, we call it the partition, when the partition happened. And there was literally, both sides were responsible. So many thousands of people were killed. Thousands of people were killed. So they hated us, we hated them. But that Pakistani was so nice. He was a gentleman. He came towards me and said, "You seem to be in trouble. Is there any way I can help you?" In a way, I had no choice. And I told him what my situation was. That guy took me home. And he fed me. He gave me shelter. And next day, he even took the day off and showed me Munich. And when we came back, my passport was at home because he had made few phone calls and the police had found it. Now what that Pakistani did, his only aim, his only goal was to help me out. He was not gaining anything at all. That is what I call about seva. And if seva is the attitude about politicians, of doctors, of lawyers, just imagine how the world will change, especially the politicians. You know, they're not there to serve themselves. They're not there to serve the special groups, but they're there to serve their constituents, their people who they send them there. And similarly, doctors too, when they, you know, to be that love the patient wants, the care the patient wants, that'll make a very big difference. And that is the seva, love I'm talking about. And that gives a meaning to life. I know of a lady, Charlene, and that lady had a florist shop with her husband. And her husband, after 30 years of marriage, passed away. And she lost meaning in her life. Her business started going down. And during winter time, one day she comes home. The old lady is in her front yard asking for Kathy. I'm just making up a name right now. Kathy. That was her daughter's name, who lived in New York, and this lady lived in a nursing home, actually in Baker Street. And after the lady came in, Charlene came, she took the lady inside, gave her warm chocolate, and figured out where the lady from which nursing home she was. And she took her back to the nursing home. And then she started visiting the lady again and again, and would take a flower with her. And then she started taking flowers for the other ladies, for other people living in the nursing home. And she became known as the flower girl. And that gave her meaning back in her life. Her business prospered, and she prospered because she found love in serving others. That's the love, that's the seva I'm talking about. And then comes healing. Forgive, love, and healing. And healing, I found out, there are 4 levels of healing. Physical, mental, social, and spiritual. Physical healing we all know. You know, we need to have a good body. God is the temple of God. And then comes mental. Mental wellness is also very important. Because if one is not mentally well, is not managing the stress well, then there is high chances of diabetes, the high chances of overweight, the high chances of blood pressure, the high chances of stroke, the high chances of heart attacks. And then comes the social wellness. Because I found in my practice as an anesthesiologist, you know, like, I'm not putting any race or anything down, but I've seen in my experience, usually, you know, Hispanic people in Bakersfield, California, they have large families. And when the more love they receive, they heal faster. They went home much earlier home, because love is something which cannot be measured, but is very healing. That's one of the reasons that our grandmothers, no matter whose grandmother it is, the food tastes very good because it's made with love. You know, everybody says my grandmother makes the best brownies, makes the best food, but it's made with love. And that's why social wellness, love, connections are very important. So much so, nowadays, even the science has discovered there's something known as mirror neurons. Like if I move my hand, automatically 30% of your cells in the brain which go with the hand movement are firing. If I'm in pain, the other person watching this also is in pain. If I'm in joy, the other person, also 30% is in joy. And studies have shown, like if I'm being nice to somebody, I'm benefiting because I'm feeling happier that I'm being nice to somebody. The person I'm being nice to benefits. But the most amazing thing is the third person who's just watching this interaction happen also benefits. And this benefit can be measured in the blood because the good hormones, the love, go up. DHEA, prolactin, growth hormone, they go up. And the stress hormones like epinephrine, non-epinephrine, cortisol, they will go down by practice of love, by seva, by caring. And then next comes the spiritual wellness. And spiritual wellness is what gives meaning to the life, of finding a purpose, of finding a dharma. And here by spiritual wellness, I leave it very broad. I'm not necessarily talking about angels, God, or for me it is God. But for somebody who does not believe in God, it could be some higher truth. You know, like preventing abuse to children, preventing child pornography, or anything which is higher than your immediate need, to have a connection to something higher. And that brings spiritual wellness. So that's why, my friends, I say, forgive easily, love passionately, and heal quickly. And in the end, as I say, I used to put people to sleep before, now I wake them up. Question and answers, please. I'll give the answers, you ask the questions. The best I can. You have extra mic or no?
No, you have to.
I can speak on. You talked about encountering 2 prior incarnations.
Yeah.
Was there any information given to you about how many incarnations people often have? 'Cause I've heard people say there could be thousands. I mean,
You know, I was not given any specific information, but there could be their old souls, their new souls. Some souls have been there for a lot of time, and some have been, come from different realms. But I was not given any specific information on how many incarnations I had. But those are the 2 I was shown, and that made sense to me that I have in my present life. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Your presentation was so beautiful. I hate to mention anything negative, but it's something that you said during the presentation. I grew up Catholic religion. As things have evolved, hell, there is no hell. We just, some people say hell is here on earth. Now, based on what you said, that...
This is a question I get asked each time,
Yeah.
to be honest. And it's a very good question, if there is hell. What my view is, God's love is non-judgmental, very pure, unconditional. But there's still consequences for action. The way I compare is my mother's love for me. No matter what I do, I kill somebody, I'm a murderer, her love is for me unconditional. She'll still accept me. But if I go and kill somebody, I still have to face the consequences of it in the society. There's a law of dharma. That's what I believe. And what I believe, ultimately, when one looks at the highest level of consciousness, hell and heaven are also illusions. Because what purely exists is pure consciousness, which is love and intelligence. That's what I believe. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that years ago you had a patient who described an NDE
Yeah.
and you kind of dismissed it. Are you speaking to your peers now? And if so, what is their acceptance level these days?
Okay, the question is, like I had a patient who had near-death experience and I dismissed it. And if I'm speaking to my peers and what their reaction is. My friends, my colleagues' reaction was exactly what my reaction was many years ago. But when my life started changing, when I resigned my top job and when I sold my house, sold my cars, and then they started believing at least there's something which happened to him that really changed him profoundly. So now they are open to it, but I'm not saying they have become believers. I think doctors will only become believers like Evan Alexander or as I mentioned before, once they go through the process themselves. But I'm trying to talk to my friends, especially all my friends are doctors, my internal medicine friends and the friends who deal with geriatrics, work in hospitals, about my experience, so they're more open to it and not people get Haldol shots. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that when you came back, you were interested in working with people who have the same conditions that you yourself went through?
Yeah.
Cancer, depression, addiction, and so forth. Are you working with people who have these?
I have some private clients and I pursue what I call consciousness-based medicine. I basically tell them to connect with their own inner self, look for answers there, and meditation, yoga, and that's what my basic modalities are to help them.
How about recommending a spiritually oriented psychotherapist?
I think that's a very good idea. Very good idea. And like as I said, I've been reading Course of Miracles, joining a study group for these things. Because for me, Course of Miracles has become one of the foundations. And all the Course talks about is love and forgiveness, and then healing. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I'm a Course in Miracles student too, but some of the things I've heard from other speakers who've come and spoken about their experiences on the other side, I took away from some of those, those discussions that there's a certain element of consciousness that travels with us to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And in that consciousness, there could be elements of fear, anxiety, other types of things that are, as the Course says, are non-existent. They're there for a short time in that place of fear and anxiety, but they always, like yourself, seem to come away from it.
Yeah.
And I look at that as kind of just as an aspect of the residue, if you will, of what we carry to the other side. That's part of the illusion.
Yeah, it's part of the illusion. That's what the Course says too. And as a part of ego, as a part of illusion, we think we are separate from the God. But in reality, we never separated from God. It's all illusion. That's why it makes total sense to me. And actually, in India, there is a philosophy known as Vedanta. And that is what it talks about. What really exists is Brahman. Brahman is what is literally can be translated as pure consciousness. Everything else is illusion. Like we are in a dream, living a dream. And when we wake up from a dream, we realize it was a dream. That's what that philosophy says, that it is illusion. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about feeling, you get to feel what it feels like to be in your presence. You got to feel what others felt.
Yeah.
Was that your entire life, and what did it feel like?
There were times I was good, I felt good. I was good to other people. But at times I was bad, mean. Then I felt felt hurt. As if I was in third person, if the other person was doing it how I would have felt to me. That's how I felt.
Your whole life?
Whole life, yeah. Especially I remember the major incidents, it just went through very fast, but the major things, it's not that I was bad all the time. There was some goodness, like I tell my wife, to be honest, I said, this is my real words to her quite often. I have done some good karma that you became my wife. I could not be standing here without her support. Listen.
Could you possibly explain, some people's full life review is instantaneous, forever now, and others have been giving accounts of having prolonged full life reviews to atone for the pain you put on others.
I cannot give an explanation why some people have so fast reviews, some people have slow review. I can only tell what happened to me.
Everyone has what they need.
Everyone has what they need, so all their cultural background, what they grew up with, or what they need. But for me, it was, like full review, the incidents and everything. And some people have this ND only for a few seconds or 1 or 2 minutes. And for me, the whole episode was about 2 hours, because when I woke up in the recovery room, I could see the time. So I really don't know what, how much time had passed, because in the other realm, there is no time. Yeah.
Could I ask you, Dr. One, did you have this recall instantaneously when you woke up in the recovery room?
Yeah.
And the whole story came to you immediately?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That's why I wanted to go on my knees and thank for the experience I had.
And then also, in the area of your addiction, did you go to a program? Did
No.
you just become spiritually so evolved that you were able to have the strength in your own mechanisms to
Exactly.
to adjust to being without pain medication?
There were 3 things which I was suffering from: addiction to pain medicines, depression, and chronic pelvic pain. Addiction was almost immediately gone, like in 2-3 days, because I still had to take pain medicines for the surgery, post-surgery. But in 72 hours, that was gone. I didn't need any more pain medicines for my surgery or for addiction. And then depression took few months, because I had to be tapered down this antidepressants, and the chronic pain also got better. So I got better on all the 4 aspects: cancer, chronic pain, depression, and addiction.
I have a 2-part question. One is, have you reached any new conclusions or insights about human suffering and the purpose for human suffering? And in a similar vein, I'm asking on behalf of a loved one who has chronic intractable pain, where conventional medication is not working well, destroying her life, and how what are your recommendations, both professionally and spiritually, about management of chronic pain?
I don't, I believe we are here to connect with God. Like, for Course in Miracles says, for us to work, that this world, our separation from God, is illusion. And so how we can reach that point, I believe, is through love and through service. That's why I laid so much emphasis on seva. And regarding the second question, spiritually for pain management, I start with deep meditation. Because if the one is grounded and connected to a source inside, the pain becomes less by itself. The feeling of the pain markedly reduces. Because I've seen in pain management practice I used to send people for yoga and meditation. And gradually, their requirements for narcotics went down. And it's mentally very important for the person who has this pain to be wanting to get better. Because most of the people just wanted their pain medicines and did not want to give them up. I specifically remember one girl. She was around 35 and she had 3 back surgeries. And she was left at the altar by her boyfriend, who refused to marry her, saying that you are on so many medications.
Wow.
And then she decided, and she came to me and she said, I want to be off all these medications. It took 6 months, but she was off all heavy-duty medications. She was on OxyContin, she was on fentanyl, lollipops, which give you immediate fentanyl. It's a very, very strong pain medicine. But she was able to get rid of, she was able to wean herself off all those. And the biggest was her motivation and me helping her through meditation and yoga. I sent her to a physical therapist who specializes in that holistic way, and he also practices Reiki, and that's what helped her do in other modalities. In the healing energy, Reiki you must have heard. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Doctor, I'm wondering how much of your ability to move on involved forgiving yourself?
Oh, it was a big part. It was a big part. That's why I said, forgiving oneself is the hardest thing to do. But moving on, that's very important. Yeah, very good question. Yes.
The Course in Miracles talks a lot about the Holy Spirit or the Christ consciousness. You talked about the guardian angels. Are they a reflection or?
I think for me, they are aspects of Holy Spirit. For me, they are aspects of Holy Spirit.
How much do you meditate a day, and is your meditation practice evolving, or?
I have become very regular in meditating. In the morning, I do it for sure every day. But in the evenings, I do it, I'll be very honest with you, 90% of the time. I'm flying or something comes up, so I end up missing 10%. But I meditate half an hour every day, as far as possible. And my meditation is more like a mantra-based transcendental meditation.
Has your own pain totally gone away? Does it
Totally
ever
gone
come
away.
back?
Totally gone away. Yes, ma'am.
My comment is that sometimes pain can be a very good teacher.
No, it is. I honestly believe half an hour or 1 hour of pain is a better teacher than 1 week of pleasure. That's true. And my transformation started in the hellish realm. That, I think, transformed me more than being in the heavenly realm. No, pain is a very good teacher.
Yes, I was going to say to understand the reasons behind the pain is consciousness.
Yeah. But as one uncovers the consciousness, as one takes the layers of illusion out and out, then what is love is, I'm not comparing love with pleasure. All that love is left, not just pleasure. For me, pleasure and love are two different things. Okay?
I'm still intrigued by the idea that I've read that says that people reincarnate in soul groups and typically within the same culture that they were in the previous life. But there's elements of your experience that seem so, the angels in the sort of hellish realm, almost like a Catholic upbringing or something, that the previous lives you saw, were they Indian or were they European? Or
for me, the medieval prince, I was in India as cruel prince, but this one Afghanistan. So in a way, it was in the same way.
But how do you explain the sort of?
No, but Afghanistan is next to India. Like it used to be next to India, but now Pakistan is in between.
So like your wife said, what happened to all the Hindu gods and deities that were supposed to be there?
I ultimately believe they're all aspects of the same reality. Like there's a very famous story in Indian literature. Like there were about 5 blind men trying to describe an elephant. Everybody gave a different view of what an elephant is look like. For me personally, they all are different aspects of the same reality. And actually, conscious level, there are different levels of consciousness. There are about 7 levels. Like one is sleeping, waking, and then dreaming, which we all 3 know. And by yoga traditions, the 4th is transcendental, when you go beyond this 4th. And then comes divine, cosmic, and universal. The universal is the level when it's pure consciousness, where everybody is connected and where nothing exists except pure consciousness. But at the divine and cosmic levels, there are gods, there are goddesses, there are archetypes, and there are angels. But as one goes totally higher, they even don't exist. So what consciousness one is talking from, which level of consciousness one is talking about, that's what makes a difference.
Let's go home.
Yeah. Hello.
How did your experience affect your ideas about medical education?
Oh, I think medical education should include end of death and dying issues that are being addressed slowly, but not to the extent I would like to. Because right now it's very mechanistic, very mechanical and biochemical. Like if you die, and there's nothing left. And but my view is that it should be promoted more, that what there is a different aspect to life also. That's why, like the reason I went to Phoenix to see was Deepak Chopra, because he's a pioneer in this mind, body, spirit medicine. It's not just mind, body, but it's mind, body, and spirit. So,
Yeah, when you read the other side, both heaven and hell, were all your senses intact, or did they have a dream like?
no, all the senses were intact. Actually, they were in a way more intact. And like I talk about the levels, like somebody asked me, did you have a body or not? From previous question. I had an ethereal body, but as I went higher and higher in the consciousness level, in the presence of light being, I felt like I was part of the light, I was separate from the light, but I didn't have any, what you call, ethereal body even that time. It just dissolved.
You mentioned that you saw 2 angels,
Yeah?
and I'm sorry, I didn't hear the second one that you said was the healing angel. I heard you
Michael
say-
and Raphael. Raphael.
Raphael.
Huh?
Two angels.
Thank you, Rajiv. This is wonderful.